final day of 4 days long virtual conference on 50 years of Bangladesh, Retrospect and Prospect, organized by Center for Policy Dialogue CPD and co-organized by South Asia Program of Cornell University. We have 2 sessions today. The first session, which is panel 7, Cost and Challenges of Development. And we are very delighted to have Dr. Fahmida Khatun, Executive Director CPD, as the chair for this session. Madam, over to you to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Obru. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are, to everyone, our discussants, panelists, and also participants. We are grateful that you have been, joining us for the last 4 days. So, as has been mentioned, that today is this is the 7th session of the 4th day and last day, and this session is about costs and challenges of development. Cost and development. As you have heard that for the last 2 days in 6 sessions, the experts, panelists, everyone had identified the successes and challenges of Bangladesh's progress in several areas, starting from economy to society to politics to social transition, art and culture. But the issue is that one of the important issues is that how this development or progress have been achieved. What is the cost of this development? So in this session, our paper presenters and also discussants, they will explore the costs of development. So whether this cost is borne due to the depreciation of the natural resources or to the sacrifices of the workers, both domestic and migrant workers, and because they are at the forefront who have to bear many challenges, though they are contributing. So whether in various sessions we heard about the distributional aspects of growth and progress, this is another aspect that growth we have been enjoying, whether it has been enjoyed by everyone, and also whether this growth has been accompanied by any type of costs, and what are the costs and who is bearing those costs. So these are the issues which will be dealt in this session. We have 3 excellent scholars for presenting papers on 3 different topics, and we also have 3 excellent discussants to make comments on these presentations. We have, you have in the brochure or on the website, you have their bios. I wouldn't repeat in the interest of time. So there will be presentations by Dr. Iftikhar Iqbal, Dr. Rizwanul Islam, and Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. So I would now first call upon Dr. Iftikhar Iqbal, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at University Brunei Darussalam. So his paper is on Bangladesh between world system and green growth, past trends and future trajectories. So over to you, Dr. Iftikhar, and as you know that you have 14 minutes to present, and Obru will give you a reminder before 2 minutes is left.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida. Mr. Obru, could you please, because it's saying host disabled, participant screen sharing. Could you please enable?
Yes, you can share now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Fahmida. প্রথমেই শ্রদ্ধা জানাই মুক্তিযুদ্ধের মহান শহীদদের প্রতি যারা এক গণতান্ত্রিক ন্যায়ভিত্তিক ও বৈষম্যহীন সমাজের স্বপ্ন দেখেছিলেন। I would thank Professor Raunak Jahan, Professor Rehman Soban, and colleagues at CPD and Cornell South Asia Program for the opportunity. It's a great honor to be among the finest minds working on Bangladesh today to celebrate Bangladesh at 50. Since I'm bound by a 14 minutes time capsule, I might sound a bit schematic, so please pardon me on that. First off, at the risk of being the devil's advocate, I would note that the current spell of economic growth in Bangladesh doesn't surprise me as a student of history, because this is a reflection of the fact that the region has shown more growth than stagnation throughout its long history. In around 1650, this region's contribution to the world's GDP was about 12% and around 50% of India's. Even in 1970, on the eve of the Liberation War, Bangladesh's GDP was close to $10 billion, almost or more than threefold more than that of Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Singapore. So, and slightly less than South Korea. So while it is time for Bangladesh to celebrate, it is also time to reflect on why and how could these countries get past Bangladesh, and why Bangladesh hasn't been able to yet catch up with them. A more important question is therefore whether Bangladesh's current economic growth is sustainable, say in the run up to 2041.
Dr. Iqbal, if you can make a full screen of your presentation.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So of the three, a more important question, as I said, is whether this current growth is sustainable. I suggest that the answer depends on the state of country's natural environment and their uses. As you can see in the graph, of the three main components of the GDP as a recently reconceptualized category, natural capital is declining across the world. How does it tally with Bangladesh? I'll try to address this by positioning Bangladesh's water resources. This is because water is the biggest backward linkage for Bangladesh, especially so because almost all of the country is like a basin, literally a basin in your kitchen, but the tap that controls the flow of water is somewhere else. Since around 93% of the surface water are sourced in transboundary rivers, any discussion on Bangladesh agriculture should prioritize the issues relating to the availability of transboundary waters. After the partition of 1947, Bangladesh had about 56,000 cubic meter of fresh water per capita. In recent years, this has come down to less than 8,000 cubic meter per capita, an eightfold decline. You can imagine the underlying causes for such significant reduction in water availability. Although the Farakka has affected both Indian and Bangladesh sides of the Sundarbans, most impact have been on the agriculture of southwestern Bangladesh because of the decline of the distributaries of the Podda. Farakka's impact on Rajshahi division and upper region of Khulna division is part of common knowledge. Barrages on Tista have left evident impact on Rangpur division. That is, the anthropogenic intervention on the rivers across the borders have affected the agriculture on which more than 50 million people depend. Environmental shocks in these regions include loss of soil nutrients and productivity, among many other problems, of course. Recent agricultural productivity in Bangladesh is highly appreciated, and this is a matter of great pride. However, in terms of total factor productivity, Bangladesh agricultural sector is less productive compared to India, China, Libya, and even Brunei, for example. As you can see in this chart, that the factors of relatively low productivity, I'll come to that this slide later, but the factors of relatively low productivity despite government's budgetary priority is generally explained in terms of absence of strong institutions, high cost of input, and insufficient investment. In terms of high input cost, if we take the example of the use of fertilizer, as you can see in here, its use per hectare has almost doubled over the past 1 decade. But beyond the increased production cost, this trend denotes that natural process of generation of soil nutrients have declined or stopped. Excessive use of inorganic fertilizer itself has huge environmental consequences, including soil acidification, harmful algae in the water, and high nitrogen emission. There is also alarming trend in shrinking of agricultural land, almost about 700 square kilometers per year due to fast urbanization, industrialization, and infrastructural development. And the shrinking of agricultural agroecological bases lead to intense competition for the remaining resources, often resulting in land grabbing by politically influential people. 85% of the day laborers responding to a survey show the daily income plunging to about 75 US cents, 50 taka in Rangpur region. The results are poor health, poor shelter, malnutrition, and in extreme cases, localized and seasonal famines, as you all know about. Food grain import has been steadily increasing with record high in pre-COVID 2017-18, and the second highest amid the pandemic last year, are not merely a reflection of the challenges of more mouths to feed, but also of how Bangladesh is losing its grip on the agroecological basis of food production. Bangladesh currently, not surprisingly, ranks 84 out of 113 countries, lowest in Asia in Global Food Security Index, prepared by The Economist. So what does this scenario tell about the possible trajectories in the economy? A note on a structural shift in demography may be useful here. Due to environmental decline in Western and Northern Bangladesh, cross-border Bangladeshi migrations to India was frequently reported from the 70s and 80s. However, since the 1990s, migrations from the peripheries of Bangladesh have been clearly towards Dhaka and Chittagong, partly, as represented in the fact that about 60%, just an example, of rickshaw pullers come from the two divisions most affected by Farakka and Tista barrages. The only region that is still not exposed to severe environmental shocks is northeastern Bangladesh in the Meghna-Shuruma basin. However, Tipaimok Dam is expected to be commissioned in the foreseeable future. This will mean a similar environmentally induced economic and social disruptions in both Manipur and India, as well as Sylhet division. Worth about 40 billion, Sylhet division represents the third largest economy in Bangladesh, larger than that of Nepal and Afghanistan, and way more than the combined GDP of India's northeastern region, excluding Assam. So environmental shocks in Sylhet region similar to Khulna, Rajshahi and Rangpur divisions can mean further spatial inequality in distribution of national wealth and enhanced environmentally induced movement to Dhaka and Chittagong. India's river linking project will multiply these impacts to a much higher extent. The crucial question is therefore whether the rapid urbanization and booming industrial and service sector of Bangladesh can accommodate the continuous flow of environmentally induced poor migrants with a minimum living standard. The answer largely depends on the state of natural resources on which the current industrial development depends. Here again comes the question of water. Currently, Dhaka's water table is receding by 3 to 5 meters per year, and by 2030, the current groundwater level of 78 meters is projected to shrink to 132 meters. The depletion taking place faster in the areas where RMG units are clustered. If the target of RMG export is $66 billion by 2030, it will cost almost 2,500 million cubic meter of fresh groundwater per year towards that time. But by that time, there may not be enough water left to access in Dhaka underground. As you can recall from the news items in late October this year, more than 1,000 patients at the National Heart Institute was held hostage by a tube oil, which threw sand instead of water, and that affected also patients in the operation theater. And if you can compare that to the heart of Bangladesh, you will get a picture. Now, if the economic growth has to negotiate between the cheap level loving world system and green governance in the coming decades, then the next industrial nerve center may rotate to Gabon or Liberia, which among other countries command much more natural capital than Bangladesh, as you can see here. In a way, ironically, when that happens, sometime around 2041, Bangladesh would perhaps be a fully grown middle-income country, but with a visible carbon emission of at least 2% of the world's total, if it does not commit itself to net zero emission. Already, Bangladesh's production and consumption of carbon per capita is higher.
Sorry, you have last 2 minutes.
Sure, I'm there. Already, Bangladesh's production, as I said, and consumption of carbon per capita is higher than GDP per capita. This means the moral ground of championing climate victims and demand for climate compensation would also be lost for Bangladesh. A couple of words on policy issues. Climate change is a major challenge, as Professor Jahan rightly mentioned yesterday. However, climate change seems to have either surpassed or encompassed all other earthbound environmental issues, with a number of major broader implications for Bangladesh. So first of all, this has deflected the attention away from the impact of the intervention on transboundary rivers. We are heading south to reclaim water from the ocean, but I think rivers needs to be prioritized. Secondly, the discourse of climate pandemic, in a way, if I use the word, has veiled the process of more immediate anthropogenic destruction of biodiversity, water bodies, and often by politically connected forces. Thirdly, the force of the climate change meta-narrative has invited the largest of all integrated projects in Bangladesh since independence. The Delta Plan, I'm talking about the Delta Plan. From the experience of Flood Action Plan, we all know such mega projects come at a cost. Neoliberalism is interesting in itself, but when it takes the color of green, it's become even more intriguing. To conclude, the question that this paper began with, by 2041, Bangladesh may well be a high-income country by GDP, but economists are already expressing concerns about the mounting challenges that will accompany such graduation, as Professor Mustafiz and other colleagues noted on Tuesday. One of the gravest challenges, however, expected from diminishing base of natural capital. 2041, in that context, may well be Bangladesh's tipping point. Now, if Bangladesh want to avert a steep fall from there through the fourth industrial revolution, the foremost question that will arise when it surpasses Singapore or Hong Kong or South Korea, can this gain be scaffolded by a university like National University of Singapore, or a bank like HSBC, or a corporation like Samsung? To achieve that, Bangladesh needs a stable ecosystem of financial regulations, institutionalized democracy, independent judiciary, distributive justice, and a sound knowledge society. Is Bangladesh ready? I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Iftekhar, for a very enlightening presentation, very insightful indeed. So we will have the discussant now. We have Dr. Rabbani. Is he here? Okay.
Yes,
so okay. So Dr. Ghulam Rabbani, he is the head of Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat at BRAC. So he will discuss on the paper of Dr. Iftikhar Iqbali. So you have 7 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, distinguished panelists and presenters. I appreciate the organizer for inviting me as a discussant on this paper, and I had a chance to look at the paper, and also I have heard from this presentation, and I believe that this is very informative, excellent presentation. But there are two perspectives that you mentioned. One is history of economic growth and the trend, and another one is the environmental perspective, the current, past, and the future. I will not focus on the economic perspective, but I will definitely focus on environmental perspective, because that goes actually is very consistent with interest of my work and my experiences. You have rightly mentioned on the anthropogenic environmental destruction, pollution, and also about the climate change. But let me use 4 words and elaborate those 4 words for both internal challenges and external challenges. My first 4 sets of 4 words includes the pollution, and the second one is the protection, and third one is the urbanization, which is rapid urbanization, and fourth one is the attention. And when I mean attention, when I say attention, I mean actually the scientific and policy attention on the environmental issues. But regarding pollution, as you see, we all know there are 3 elements we call as environmental resources: land, water, and air. So you correctly mentioned, about the land pollution, land degradation, how things are happening, in Bangladesh. We are using inorganic fertilizer, and you showed the trend. We use 184 kilo per hectare in 2007, which has been increased to 318 kilos in 2018. So too much of inorganic fertilizer that we are using. And one of the soil scientists that I was in another session, and he was mentioning the 25% of this used pesticides and inorganic fertilizers actually go to the water stream and pollute the water stream. So this is another type of problem that we see. And loss of land, erosion of land every year is regular example that we see in different articles, papers, in the national dailies and also in the international publications. Regarding water, you correctly mentioned that we are actually suffering from both surface water pollution and also groundwater depletion. And you mentioned in your paper that how the groundwater is declining in most of the cities, including Dhaka. So this is really concern for the policymakers. Industrial waste, municipal waste, the 25% of the fertilizers that I just mentioned, salinity intrusion due to climatic factors and Farakka barrage, and sedimentation, arsenic contamination. So these are all elements that you mentioned in the paper. So this is quite good. But what missing element that I saw in your paper is in terms of air pollution. You mentioned about the emission factors, but Bangladesh very recently, in fact, just 2 months back, they submitted enhanced nationally determined contribution where Bangladesh committed 6.72% reduction of the total emission by 2030 in the country, and that is unconditional. But again, 15.12% emission reduction will be done by the country, which is conditional. So if they get support from the other countries, developed countries, development partners, So they will reduce the emission by 15.12%, and the total emission is going to be like 409 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent. So this is probably could be included in your paper. That would enrich the enrich your paper. Regarding protection of the natural resources, just one or 2 points that I would like to mention, that we have a number of policies, but unfortunately, enforcement of the environment policy, conservation rule, and other relevant, plan. For example, we have the country investment plan for environment and forestry, but how far we are implementing? We have, huge budget that we offer, but it seems like, the small percent actually go to the community level and on the ground. So these are the two major points. And another point that I would like to mention here under the protection is institutional arrangement. You see, we have a small country that we understand, but still environmental protection issues should be ensured in most of the cities, particularly in the coastal zone. 19 districts out of 64 districts, but it's not happening. In terms of attention, I mentioned that scientific and policy attention is not very strong that I see in terms of natural resource management or environmental resource management. And rapid urbanization, as you correctly mentioned, this is one of the challenges that we see. The urbanization is happening in a very unplanned manner in the country. On the external challenge, another 4 sets of words I would like to mention is cooperation. As you mentioned, the transboundary water cooperation is extremely important. There is one tool that has been identified by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is called integrated water resource management. Integrated water resource management tool cannot be implemented until or unless we have an effective agreement between Bangladesh and India on water resources. So this is another challenges. And we know low flow of water in different river system in Tista and also Madhumati Gorai system. So these are the challenges that we see. My second word under the external challenge I would like to mention is adaptation to climate change. As you know, to achieve 1.5 degrees centigrade, the world has to reduce carbon emission by 45% at 2010 level. What does it mean? It means in 2010, the total carbon emission level was 47.3 gigaton. So there should be 21 gigaton, reduction by 2030 to achieve 1.5 degree. And at the same time, to achieve 2 degrees centigrade temperature, 25% of 2010 level has to be reduced. Otherwise, the entire world will face actually 2.4 to 2.7 degrees centigrade temperature increase. So these are the challenges. So to adapt with this, changing condition, the adverse impact of climate change, we have, global policy. And what is that? The Paris Agreement. What does it say, particularly on the financial issue?
Sorry, Dr. Rabbani. Dr. Rabbani, your 7 minutes is over. Please.
I will conclude in 1 minute. 30 seconds. So the commitment was $100 billion per year between 2020 and 2025, but it is not happening. The allocation, it seems, from the climate finance delivery plan, they are providing less than $80 billion. And from COP26, what we see, from the current pledge in last month, only $10 billion was pledged by 32 developed countries. So the external challenges are actually affecting, our country again. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for taking more time.
Thank you, Dr. Ghulam Rabbani, for your comments. I would now quickly move on to the second paper because I don't want to, make any comments at this point in the interest of time. So we have another interesting paper by Dr. Rizwanul Islam. He is a former special advisor employment sector at the International Labour Office, Geneva. So his paper is on 50 years of Bangladesh, 50 years of development experience of Bangladesh and employment and labor perspective. So over to you, Dr. Rizwanul Islam.
Thank you, Chair. Am I allowed to screen share?
Yes, sir, you can share.
Thank you. Let me start by remembering all those who sacrificed their lives for the independence of the country, and also by congratulating ourselves on this occasion of the 50th anniversary of the country, and greetings for the Victory Day. Bijoy Divosher Shubhechha Shobaike. I should also like to thank CPD for inviting me to this important conference, and in particular to Professor Rehman Sobhan, who taught me development economics at Dhaka University, and also Professor Raunak Jahal, whom I have respected ever since I started my university teaching. In this paper, or I would say presentation, because the paper has not yet been written, I basically look at the narrative of development or growth of the economy of Bangladesh from the perspective of the basic factors of production, and in particular, labor. Of course, I don't ignore the other factors. And I do it in three parts. In part one, I look at the contribution of employment and labor in particular. In part two, I look at what has happened to labor, what they have received in return for their contribution. And in part three, I look at a broader development issue, which is that as the economic growth takes place, whether the country has been, or the economy has been able to absorb its surplus labor that is available or was available at the beginning of the growth process. So these are the three things that I look at. The outcome of growth for workers, I look at for both domestic and those who work abroad. And I address this particular question, jobs abroad, but at what cost? First, the narrative of economic growth from the perspective of employment and labor. There, I point out three important pillars of economic growth in Bangladesh over the last 50 years. First, agriculture, and in agriculture, particular importance of high-yielding variety of seeds in the growing of food grains. And that I present in slides 5, 6, and 7. I refer to these slides because there are so many slides that I will not be able to go into the details of each of these slides. So I will basically make a few statements which are based on these slides. And my hope is those who are interested may be able to look at the slides in details later. And then manufacturing is the second pillar. And within manufacturing, we all know the ready-made garments, but unfortunately, it has remained, the manufacturing pillar basically has remained confined to one single industry. Although one might say there are many other industries, I will later hopefully try to explain why I say that basically it has depended on one particular industry. And the third pillar is overseas employment and the associated factor of remittances, because Employment is one important factor associated with international migration, but it also generates remittances and foreign exchange, which contributes to the health of the macroeconomy. I will explain that also, but those are mentioned in slides 13, 14, and 15. Now, why do I consider agriculture to be such an important pillar of growth? If you look at the history of economic growth in Bangladesh, you will see that particularly in the 80s, the manufacturing growth actually declined, and it was agriculture which kept up the growth, and the growth of agriculture increased over decades. Compared to the 70s, it increased in the 80s, and it increased in the 90s also, and when manufacturing sector was lagging. And within agriculture, it is high-yielding varieties, and that's where labor comes in. If you look at this slide even quickly, you will see that different crops require different amounts of labor. And another particular factor that one has to remember or note is that in the context of paddy, importance of boro has increased tremendously. Although in Bangladesh, traditionally, almond was the major crop, but now boro has emerged as the major crop. And if you look at the right side of this slide, you will see that boro, particularly the HYP boro, requires a much higher amount of labor per unit of land. And that is what helped agriculture absorb a much bigger amount of labor than originally. And for at least a couple of decades, that was the major source of employment and income for the people of Bangladesh. And then I come to the second pillar, the ready-made garment industry, where the employment growth, as you can see, in some periods actually was achieved double-digit growth. And exports also achieved double-digit growth. And an important factor that I wanted to point out here, although we often talk about low productivity of workers, particularly in the manufacturing sector, you can see that export per worker has increased. It has registered positive growth. Look at the last column, and it continued till very recently. And that, at least indirectly, to me, is an indicator of the improvement in labor productivity. And that I show in another slide, that is in fact, two slides, slides 10 and 11. It will take a bit of time if I wanted to explain it, but I'm not going into that. Simple thing that I would like to say is that I have undertaken a decomposition of growth, both GDP growth and manufacturing output growth, and try to see which part of growth has been contributed by quantity of labor and which part of growth has been contributed by labor productivity. And look at that. If we look at GDP, up to 2010, the contribution of both quantity and productivity, that was roughly equal. But look at more recent years, 10 to 16, 17. Part of growth due to productivity has increased tremendously. It's almost three-fourths now. Look at manufacturing, the same story. Earlier, much of it was due to quantity of labor, employment, but now it has changed. A much higher proportion is due to labor productivity. So that's an important thing. Now the third pillar, overseas employment and remittances. I present the numbers. The remittances as percentage of GDP, over 10% at the peak, and even now it is over 6%. And a very important role of remittances in building up the foreign exchange reserve, about which we are now proud. Now it's over $46 billion, and remittances made a major contribution. And this particular graph, again, it may look a little complicated, but to summarize this, it contributes to maintaining the current account balance of the country, because the trade account, what we export and what we import, trade account is always in the negative, shown by the green line here. But when you take into account the remittances, then the current balance is this yellow bar. Sorry. Which is generally positive, but in some years that becomes negative. Now, my second part, what has been the outcome after all these contributions, be it in agriculture, be it in manufacturing, be it in terms of overseas employment? I summarize the trends. First, the real wages of workers within the country. Real wages started rising only after 2000. You can see it in this graph. For a long period, it remained basically static and then started rising. But it increased only up to 2010-11. After that, it couldn't be sustained and it started declining, actually. You can see that from 2010-11, it started declining, and the decline continued till about 14-15, and it started rising again. But the rise could not, the level of 10-11 could not be achieved. And of course, the COVID pandemic stopped that rising trend also. Here I present the monthly wage growth in various sectors as well as overall, and the inflation rate, which is in red. You can see that certain sectors, the wage growth is lower than inflation rate, particularly fisheries, construction. These are the sectors where the wage growth has remained below that of inflation rate. So that's about wages. What about other conditions? We all know that industry is a sector which has the dubious distinction of many accidents, and particularly the ready-made garment industry. We know of major disasters like the Tazreen Fashions, Rana Plaza, and so on and so forth. In 2013, that was the major accident. And you can see that the number of significant accidents actually declined after 2013. That was the Rana Plaza, year of the Rana Plaza disaster. After that, a lot of attention was received by this industry, and as a result, a number of actions were taken, and some decline has taken place in the number of industrial accidents.
Sorry, sir, you have last 2 minutes.
Okay, but it has not ended. The next point that I wanted to make is the rights of workers. You can see from this slide that, again, when there was attention of the international community and the national community on that, there was some spurt, some incentive for guaranteeing the workers' rights through the formation of trade unions. Like up to 2014, there was some increase in the application and approval of government for trade unions, and after that it started declining again. So we all know what the situation is. And if we look at the overseas employment, cost of overseas employment, we all know what the situation is: low wages, poor working and living conditions, workers' rights denied. We know of discrimination and xenophobia. We know of migration through irregular channels and abuse by agents, both in the sending countries, in our own country, and in the receiving countries. We know how much it costs for example, in Bangladesh, it's now something like $5,000 per person on an average, which is much lower in other countries. And in Bangladesh, it's twice the GDP per capita, which is again much higher than in other countries. Now, finally, what has happened to the absorption of surplus labor? Not much. Again, the employment growth rate has declined over time. You can see from this slide that up to 2005-06, the rate of employment growth was 3.3%. And in recent years, it has declined to 1.82%. And if you look at the indicators of surplus labor, like real wage trends, number increased in agriculture, number of workers engaged in agriculture and in manufacturing, labor force engaged in informal sector. I have presented some data in these slides. They all indicate that the journey towards the full absorption of surplus labor, which we call the so-called Lewis turning point, after the name of W. Arthur Lewis, who is the major proponent of the dual economy model. We see that that journey is still a work in progress. So in conclusion, what can we say? We can say that yes, the country has achieved very impressive rates of growth. It has made achievements in the social dimensions also, but there are limitations, there are challenges that remain, and I have not even touched upon the challenges created by the latest challenges created by the COVID pandemic that has led to a reversal of some of the major or improving trends. So, and the journey towards the absorption of surplus labor, improving the workers' lives and living conditions, those trends have been reversed. And unless these challenges are addressed properly, we can keep claiming Bangladesh to be a role model of development. We can take satisfaction from the so-called, we talk a lot about graduation from LDCs, but these claims will remain hollow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rizwanul Islam, for another excellent paper. We have heard from his elaboration the other aspects. So in the first paper, we heard about the natural capital. Now we heard about the human capital, how it is contributing and how it is also being not taken care of, and what are the costs associated with it. So this paper will be discussed by Dr. Khundukar Ghulam Muazzem. He is the research director of CPD. I should mention here that after the presentation or discussion, I'm supposed to give also a few minutes to the paper presenters. I will do that after all the papers are presented and all the discussions are finished. Then I will go back to the paper presenters to make their observations in respect to the discussions points. So over to you, Dr. Khundukar Ghulam Muazzem.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to thank Dr. Rizwanul Islam for making an excellent presentation and an excellent narrative of Bangladesh's economic growth, and from the perspective of employment and labor, which is a unique narrative which often we miss. And that narrative we have heard from Dr. Rizwanul Islam's today's presentation. And I also learned a lot from his presentation. I have some few comments on his presentation. I think Dr. Rizwanul Islam has highlighted the growth narrative from 3R dimension, where often we say rice, R&D, remittance, and that narratives we have more specifically and elaborately we have found the evidence from his presentation. And for that, I think he provided the explanation from a private sector-led approach. I think how the private sector has contributed to agriculture, manufacturing, and the services has very well articulated three important cases. It has been actually articulated in his paper. But at the same time, I think there is another narrative which I think Dr. Rizwan Islam may take into consideration, is that institutional part. While the private sector-led discussion is fine from the employment point of view, but while we discuss about the labor issues or the decent employment issues, definitely there may have an institutional role. Even on the employment point of view, there may have an institutional role. And I'm not sure how that could be blended in this paper, but let me actually share my thoughts in this perspective. I think Dr. Rizwan Islam very rightly and very interestingly mentioned that how the productivity, labor productivity has increased over time, and how the post-2010 onward labor productivity overpassed the contribution of employment in overall growth of overall growth in the GDP and the manufacturing sector. And this could be also elaborated in a way that the regime is such that during the time, the public investments in the infrastructure, particularly on the electricity, on the road communication and others, that has also takes place. And before that, I think in public investment in the agriculture, a favorable subsidy policy for the agriculture, that has also contributed, and those may have positively contributed to HIV rice production, as well as the ready-made garment sector growth and more investment in the capital-led production process in the country, and thereby it has contributed in overall productivity rise. Including the labor productivity rise during this time. So this could be one way to actually look into it issue. Another dimension here is that the global norms, rules, and the global accord. For example, the duty-free market access that Bangladesh received in post-2005 after the end of the multi-fiber arrangement, that has also made a positive contribution in case of the ready-made garment sector growth. So that is also an issue to look into. And over time, this has made a positive contribution towards that part. On the other hand, I think Dr. Rizwan has rightly mentioned that that productivity growth has not reflected properly in the real wage growth, and that is a very interesting. And I'd like to thank Dr. Rizwan to raise this issue very clearly, that how these two are actually matched, particularly in the 2005 and 2010 onward. And he also mentioned that in the 1980s and 90s, that this has also not been actually matched together. And you could actually link it with in another dimension. In fact, 1980s and 90s are the time when the minimum wage was not revised. The major formal sectors didn't actually revise much during the 1980s and 90s. And I had prepared a paper for ILO, and where I mentioned that this is a period of hibernation, where the army regime of Ershad and follow-up regime didn't actually change much about the minimum wage of the major formal sector. Did that has an impact on the real wage less rise of the real wage during that period? You may take that into account. And on the other hand, in another note, you may also look into that the ready-made garment sector wage has a link. Does that has a link with the overall wage rise in the manufacturing sector or in other sectors? If you notice your pickup on the wages, you may see that those years where ready-made garment sector's wages were revised, 2006, 2010, 2013, and 2018. And that may have some impact in overall wage-related issues. So I would like to indicate that institutions or the government intervention in the wage level have both of a positive as well as a negative implications in overall wage-related issues in the context of Bangladesh, and that I think is an important issue to be taken into consideration. And from that point of view, if you go to the decent employment issue, and you have mentioned about the workplace safety issues, you have also mentioned about the workers' organizations issues.
Majum bhai, you have last 2 minutes.
Yes, you have workers' organization issues. You may similarly argue that because of the poor institutions, this Rana Plaza or the other things happen. On the other hand, after the Rana Plaza intervention of the global organizations, global institutions, and local institutions cooperation, we have take sufficient note. So institutions have a both positive, negative role in this context, and that you may also take into consideration. So my final point here is that I think a narrative of the institutions you may take into consideration, both positive and the negative way that has been actually impacted during this time. So from this, I think what would be the takeaway for the future? Are these 3R will continue sustain in the future as the major growth? May not be. I think that indication is there. And if not, then what are the other future sources of growth for Bangladesh in agriculture, whether it is vegetables, non-food, non-crop related issues, or whether in the manufacturing, whether it is pharmaceuticals or others, or in the service sector, whether it is ICT. We are not sure. So what would be the future sources of growth? That is one. And how the institutions, future institutions like local and the global institutions and the laws and norms will contribute in our future trajectory of growth, where employment and the labor issues will simultaneously contribute in the growth of Bangladesh. So these are my few observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muazzem, for those comments on the paper of Dr. Rizwanul Islam. Now, I would like to call upon Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. This is the last paper in this session, and his paper is on responding to changing geopolitics. And Professor Imtiaz is a professor at the Department of International Relations at Dhaka University. So over to you. You have 14 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fahmida. Let me, the slides, they move, Manish, is it okay, the slide?
Yes, yes, it's moving, yes. Yeah, you can.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Change.
Because last time I found that it was not moving anyway. Thank you very much. Let me thank CPD, thank the organizers for, mainly bringing excellent numbers of scholars for the last 4 days. The topic that I was given originally had this title also, the Bangladesh in a Changing World Order, but now I see that it has been shifted to the last panel. But anyway, the subtitle remains Responding to Changing Geopolitics. Probably this would be a bridge between this session and the next section, because I would not be talking about the cost, not so much even of the challenges also, but let's see. When we talk about geopolitics, the first thing, and this slide will, tells you that it's humans who create geopolitics. Geopolitics does not create humans. And this philosophical understanding is central to my argument. Because the number of geopoliticians that we had earlier, those who made names, whether it's Mahan, the American geopolitician, talking about that, if you control the sea or the oceans, then you control the world. And then you have Mackinder coming, and he's a British, talking about mainly on the heartland, that those who control the Asia, maybe Europe, more centrally Europe, but a little bit of Asia, then if you have that heartland, then you control the world. And of course, from that, that argument, you have Karl Hosofer talking about the Lebensraum and how the Nazis have made use of it. So if you look at, if you read Mahan, read Mackinder, read Hosofer, you will see the inbuilt understanding is colonialism, imperialism, domination. That's central to it. I think what they have missed is that it is humans and not the territories, because every piece of the earth can be geopolitically important, provided humans make it. So that's the argument. And I will go very quickly, since I have 13 minutes or so to make my argument. I guess the slides will help you. Now, this is a slide of the Turkish poet Nazim Hikmat. And Nazim Hikmat had an interesting line where he said, just wait, as long as I've got honey in my pot, bees will come to it from Timbuktu. So that is, the central point. If you can build honey, the more honey you have, more honey Bangladesh will make, more development or growth, or, and you can talk about Human Development Index, GDP, the more the bees will be coming. And there is a history to this, and I will very quickly get into the history to give you a sense of that. Back in the 18th century, and if you look at this particular slide, you will see, it was a vibrant economy. Keep in mind, in the 18th century, China was the largest economy in the world. What we have today is re-rise of China and not rise of China. And in 18th century, undivided India was the second largest economy in the world. And in that undivided India, Bengal was the richest province. And that is precisely the reason why the bees came all the way from Europe to Bengal. Now, arrival of the British and the birth of IR in South Asia. When people talk about international relations, they would refer to, there are X number of books. They probably would refer to 1919. And we have a course in our department also, IR since 1919, the Treaty of Versailles. But for South Asians, international relations starts from 1757 when the British colonized Bengal. That's the starting point of IR or geopolitics in Bangladesh or Bengal. And of course, colonialism is tied to it. But look at the rise of, I go back to, yes. But this colonialism also led to the underdevelopment of Bengal in a serious way. And I guess this Octopus kind of image will tell you what was inland all about. Now, don't forget the rise of the West. It was nothing excellent, kind of imagination. It simply depended on the slaves, to North America and raw materials from there, particularly cotton, and those getting into Dundee and Glasgow, the manufacturing goods. Dundee and Glasgow, they never grow cotton, but they became the largest producer of cotton. And in the process, they destroyed not only Bengal, they literally destroyed Dhaka. Dhaka was one of the big cities in those kind of the world. And there are a good number of books on this now, so it's easy to compare what happened. Now, back in the 18th century, as I said, the richest province in the 18th century really ended up with famine in 1943. And look at Churchill's statement. My God, I can't imagine. He said, I hate Indians. And they are a beastly people with a beastly religion. I don't know why we celebrate this man from time to time. Is absolutely a racist to the core. But Bengal in 1943 had a really tough time. Now, not only going back, not only than the development, but the cartographical massacre that Bengal had, 1905 and 1911. When we talk about Bengal, Bengal always meant the Greater Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, and Bengal. But then in 1905, it got divided. But when it was revoked in 1911, Bihar and Orissa were cut off from Bengal, and nobody really noticed that, to the point that they should have. Now, why that was the reason? Well, Mr. Risley, the Home Secretary, pointed out very clearly to Lord Curzon, and this is the statement on 6 December 1904. He said, Bengal united is a power, Bengal divided will pull in several different ways. So they were scared of Bengal. They had this interesting relationship with Bengal, but they really feared Bengal. Yes, Bengal invited them, but also, if you look at the Bengal terrorism, that really made them, I would say, hate people of Bengal in many, many ways. But they did not stop there. There was a partition of Bengal in 1947. Yes, people of both Bengal got trapped to it and somehow divided Bengal into East Pakistan and West Bengal. But that was not all. We had a genocidal partition in 47, 1 million people killed, number of 10 million crossed the borders. Then we had genocidal partition again in 71, where 3 million people got killed. So this is the history one has to keep in mind when we talk about growth and development and some of the success stories. If we don't have that history in our head, we will not get to the future that we want. So my argument here is, out of that history, there are 3 exceptionality that Bangladesh has in relation to South Asia. The first South Asian exceptionality is Bangladesh is the only people's republic in South Asia. There are altogether 5 people's republic. First one is North Korea. The second was China. The third is Algeria. Fourth is Bangladesh. And the latest one was Laos. So there are 5 people's republic. And Bangabandhu did not even wait a second to think what would be the name of the country. You have this on the left side, you can see at the very beginning that the country's name was People's Republic of Bangladesh. There was no second thought what would be the name, and people can now talk about whether he was mesmerized in some of the People's Republic that he saw in his lifetime. Now, the second South Asian exceptionality is the liberation war of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the only South Asian country which fought a liberation war. You can talk about Netaji Subhash Bose, but since he did not get into power, not to mention he slided into fascism, having friends with fascist countries, Bangladesh remains an exceptional where the security forces and people fought together. Myself, I was just a class 9 student, but I left my parents, went to Agartala, literally slept on the pavement. And I can tell you, there are hundreds and thousands of people were ready to fight for the liberation. And this is an exceptional, which is very important, which we should not forget when we look into some of the success stories now. And the third principle, and the third exceptionality is, of course, the foreign policy principle of Bangladesh, friendship to all and malice towards none. Keep this in mind. This is not post-1971. This was stated for the first time in the Awami League manifesto in June 1970, when we had Cold War, when Pakistan was member of CENTO and SEATO. At that particular time, Bangabandhu, Awami League under the leadership of Bangabandhu had the courage to say friendship to all and malice towards none. And that continued after 71. But look at what he said on 6 February 1972. And this is a speech in his honor by Indira Gandhi. And this is just a month after he returned to Bangladesh. And this is just after liberation war with the genocide and all. He tells to Indira Gandhi, let there be an end once for all to the strife policy of confrontation between neighbors. If you think of SAARC and South Asia, believe it or not, this is one particular speech one should reread 10 times to see where SAARC was coming. A lot of people give credit to SAARC for some other leaders, but I think the foundation of SAARC is in this statement, and he mentions time and again why South Asian countries should work together. Now, this is the 50 years independence. Out of that 3 exceptionality, what we have, if you look into the numbers from 71 to 2021, I don't have to flag this. I think the last 3 days you have probably have gone through this, whether GDP, per capita, life expectancy. I focus on the life expectancy, which is really, really interesting one, because if you look at this particular slide, you'll see it has also crossed Pakistan and India, and is almost catching up China. Now, the GDP growth rate, I'm sure all of you are familiar. I don't want to go into detail. Up until now, we don't know whether the Omicron would hit us really bad, but up until now, I think Bangladesh has managed pretty well. I don't think it is, I don't know who to give the credit. It could be the weather, it could be our immunity, it could be the fuchka that we have every day. So, it can be for different reasons why the COVID did not hit us the way it should have, or the way it had hit some other countries. Now, when you have decolonization and the globalization, this is where things have changed. And what we have, the re-rise of Asia is mainly because of globalization. And this is important to understand, because even Marx and Lenin never thought about production to become international. They talk about the internationalization of trade, internationalization of finance, banking, that was all there. But Marx, even Lenin never saw or never thought that production could be made international. And that happened mainly because of the technology with a large shipbuilding that we have today here. Now, with the geopolitical competitions out of this, thank you. I'll finish in 2 minutes. With this re-rise of Asia, you have a series of geopolitical competitions, and look at how the BRI or China is being contained in the Pacific Alliance, the Quad, the Build Better World Partnership, all mainly to actually contain one particular country. I could give figures on the military side of it, but I don't think I have time. Now, the pandemic has also showed that those who are trying to make a geopolitical competition vis-a-vis China would they're not getting well together, because the vaccine nationalism has really hit them hard. And we have also seen the intra-Quad misgiving. So I'm not really sure what the future of Quad will be, but pandemic has really transformed the geopolitics, bipolarity that one could have talked about. And now with the visit of Putin to India, will also tell you that things are very murky and grayish. Now, for us, for Bangladesh, we look at these as incommensurable strategies, because BRI focuses on traditional infrastructure, whereas the Build Better Partnership focuses on non-traditional infrastructure. So, somehow I think for Bangladesh, we see that we could be in both. We are not looking at as either an or kind of a situation. Look at even the so-called conflict or the conflict that China and India recently had. Not a single arms were used. And the reason, as you know, that they have an agreement which actually, not to have any arms, not to carry arms within 2 kilometers. And I was thinking that why India, Bangladesh doesn't do the same thing. But whatever it is, no arms were used. Yes, they have a conflict, but I guess it's a different kind of a conflict, which I'm sure both India and China will be able to manage. Now, the last two figures is, we see the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and the replacement of new, partners in South Asia, and they've come to help the Afghan economy. So you have China, you have Russia, you have Iran, who have thought 20 years back that this will happen. And on the other hand, you have a geopolitics of military-industrial complex. Now with no Afghan war, I think the Quad is now transforming into triad, and it's more defense-oriented. So one has to look into the military-industrial complex, how United States will reproduce its economy without this MIC, which Eisenhower really cautioned in his farewell speech. My final slide is, out of this geopolitical competition, all Bangladesh somehow is a development without any enmity. We literally do not have enemies. Myanmar is trying its best to make us enemy, but even with Myanmar, we have trading relationships. People still visit there, and we are in all kind of organizations, whether it's SAR, BIMSTEC, BBI, BCM, Indo-Pacific, One Belt, name anything. We will be in it, and that I think is the way for Bangladesh to go forward. I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. You have taken us to the road of history and memory, to the memory lane, in fact. So now I would like to request Dr. Sri Radha Datta who is the Center Head, Neighborhood Studies and Senior Fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation, India. So to share her thoughts on the presentation made by Professor Imtiaz, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Hamida and Famida and Professor Rehman Shoban and Professor Ronak Jahan for this invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here, and a greater pleasure to listen to Professor Imtiaz's presentation. I'm sorry, my neighbors are doing some building work, and it just I think the resonance is too strong, but I'll try and still focus my thought and get this over. I was just looking, I read Professor Imtiaz's presentation when you sent to me, and I heard him very intently. Let me just focus on two aspects of it. One is, of course, this honeypot that he talks about, and which basically alludes to the fact that Bangladesh is really in an enviable position in South Asia, and there is absolutely no argument with that. And I completely agree with much of what has been said. In fact, the fact that Bangladesh has extended a 200 million USD loan to Sri Lanka in this June is certainly, a huge step forward in terms of shedding the previous notions that was largely known in the international system about Bangladesh as a, the weaker, smaller state. It's now been talked about as a new Asian tiger. And of course, we have many commentators talking about how important an Indo-Pacific middle player Bangladesh is now. So, this is not to take away any of the achievements that has been highlighted by Professor Imtiaz. And of course, for me, much of what Bangladesh's 50 years trajectory actually is summed up in Professor Rehman's absolutely the most fascinating foreword that he's written for the book, which we edited on Bangladesh at 50, where he so subtly puts the whole thing together as to this whole journey. But the point here that I'm making is, and I come back to the honeypot and the last point that Professor Imtiaz made about no enmity. I think what Bangladesh is able to do, and this is again not to take away those domestic achievements, the kind of growth trajectory and all of the other indicators that we've heard about. But the point is that right now, the way I see it, geographical location of Bangladesh has actually played a very distinct role. And this whole externalities in this kind of a very, I would say, tense, multipolar political landscape in Asia that we are living in, which has actually offered Bangladesh a far greater bargaining position than it could have otherwise. In an environment where we now find, China is predominant in Asia. Japan, of course, has carved its role in several ways. India is positioning itself as an Asian power. Everybody is scrambling together to have Bangladesh on their side. The kind of maneuvering choices that Dhaka has, again, while not to take away the phenomenal domestic transformation that is done, but much of it is actually impinged on a lot of the externalities which has worked in favor of Bangladesh. My only point is this honeypot that we are discussing, which he began with, and I know he didn't focus on it, and there were a lot of other aspects to it, but for today's brief presentation, I would actually say it's really this Asian power mix, the rivalry power mix that is happening here, which is crude Bangladesh, and which is Bangladesh has managed so very effectively. It's balancing, it's all the powers here. And I think the criticality lies here in that where every regional and extra regional power wants to have Bangladesh on their side. So at a certain point, I would actually say that Bangladesh can be labeled as a pivot here. But the argument here is that supposed to say Bangladesh did not have this growth trajectory, wasn't the fastest growing Asian power just now as we see it, and that fascinating HDIs that they've done, I would still think that Bangladesh would be able to take advantage of this competitive power mongering that is happening in the neighborhood, and which has, given the kind of space that Bangladesh has. This whole growing competition that we see over connectivity and the investment flows that have worked here. This whole geopolitical tension, which is competing connectivity initiatives from China, Japan, of course, Indian initiatives we know on the borderland, what borders that's happening. It's infused a new kind of energy into the infrastructure investments that's taken place, not only across global south, of course, but has certainly worked in favor of Bangladesh. And again, the point here is that, while there is and I think Professor Imtiaz talked about this refocus on Indo-Pacific, where the extra-regional players see a very, very strategic advantage in engaging with Bangladesh, and thus we have high-level visits from USA, which is followed by a warning from China. India is constantly jumping in and out, trying to, press upon Bangladesh what it believes and what it hopes that it will be able to carry it through. But the point here also is that Bangladesh, given its situation, has also facilitated a far deeper penetration of external players into the political mosaic. I mean, Bangladesh is not only one, although other states also have done it. But I think the kind of penetration we see of extra-regional players in the region now, which is added to this whole complexity that we see, is something which is again can be alluded to the fact that Bangladesh has been able to play that role. Also, and I would say here that the lack of a successful multilateral approach in the region. I mean, we've talked about SAARC, we've seen how it's gone nowhere, we've seen other attempts at regionalism. The fact that multilateralism, effective, successful multilateralism, kind of has a justice in place in terms of equity being distributed, which hasn't happened, which has also given Bangladesh, I think, ability to work towards a far more effective maneuverability and achieve whatever has been able to. So a lot of it, I'm saying that while I mean, there is no such thing as Bangladesh hasn't and never and wasn't going towards that trajectory, having a very decisive military power or having in the initial years any distinct economic leverage, really. But at the same time, it was able to pursue its interest. I mean, I think that is something which always strikes about Bangladesh. That though, I mean, I would also say, and I do appreciate this point about how friendship with all and enmity with none.
Sorry, Dr. Siradha, your last 2 minutes.
I'll just finish here. Yeah, I would say that but it's good, and but a student of international politics, we do understand that developments take place in international systems, governments change, and there are often reinterpretation that takes place. And it's not far away from memory that we've seen how Bangladesh toyed and push boundaries in other direction. Of course, it has turned around now. It's working very closely with India and many other neighbors. But I'm just saying that a whole lot of externalities are involved in pushing Bangladesh and making it the kind of a extremely wanted player in the region just now. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sriradha Datta. I would now go back to the paper presenters once again before we open up for question and answer session. 2 minutes. I would provide 2 minutes to each of the presenters in respect to the comments made by the discussants. So first, I would like to request Dr. Iftikhar Iqbal. So if you have anything to say to what Dr. Rabbani has mentioned on your paper.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida. I think Dr. Rabbani had to go. So I think his comments were quite important and suggestive. I was looking at the supply side of ecology that fuels economic growth, and for that reason, water comes at the center stage of the paper. But I think his comments is definitely very important in terms of the pollution factors. Some of you might have noted in the newspaper that in the last few months in Buriganga, there is a new kind of fish called sucker fish, alien to Bangladesh. It's coming from some Latin American countries. And sucker fish actually thrives where the level of oxygen is very low, where other fish cannot live. So in Buriganga is being invaded by sucker fish. And more alarmingly, I think more recently, in the last week or so, there is a suckerfish was caught in Podda River near Goalondo. So I'm very afraid. I feel that if this suckerfish, they're also predatory fish. So that might have long-term ecological context, ecological impact on the other local fish varieties. So I think pollution is very important. But if we go to the air pollution, because we are celebrating, I didn't want to spoil the party. I think Bangladesh is now #1 as a country pollutant in terms of the most polluted country in the world, and Dhaka is the second most polluted city in the world. So when, in a way, we celebrate the the age of expectancy of life. Let's say, for example, in Dhaka, every year we have 500,000 people coming to Dhaka, and almost 100,000 people are being killed by air pollution. So it's a very difficult situation here. How do we do the cost analysis for this panel? Very, very tricky situation here. The cost of development, the cost of growth are enormous, and probably we have to continue to continue the discussion. And maybe last point, I think that is also important when we are talking about transboundary rivers. It is important to note that India also has its legitimate need for water. So when you look at these issues from a nation-state perspective, so India and Bangladesh, or India or China, I think that's not going to help anyway in right now, because in the 70s, there was demand, in the late 70s, 80s, there was kind of demand for kind of internationalization of Farakka, for example. But by 90s, Farakka has the treaty has shown that it is possible to do things bilaterally. But beyond that, what I would suggest that even that after that, in the lack of system like Mekong Commission, it hasn't been fully implemented, the Farakka. That's why the water issues are a problematic issues. So I think in a way there should be a third solution, and that solution should be looking at the rivers as a commons. And Professor Imtiaz Ahmed has recently written a book also on rivers as a common, which is very important to look at. So we have West Bengal against a kind of problem, any kind of solution to Farakka issues, but then look at the initiatives and the assessment of the Chief Minister of Bihar. Bihar Chief Minister Mr. Nitin, he wants the decommissioning of Farakka. So is it possible that Bangladesh can open a new channel to understand what Bihar and even Uttar Pradesh, they are really, really anti-Farakka now. And even in West Bengal, the very rationale for which Farakka was erected, the desiltation by the water of Podda.
Thank you, Professor.
That is not happening. So 20 seconds. Thank you. That's not happening. So I think beyond bilateral, beyond internationalization of this problem, there is now in this era of Anthropocene, when you look at animals, human being, all part of a planetary board that we are in, we need to go beyond the state. We need to look at the trans-local understanding of things. So I think we need to initiate those kind of new channels. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Iqbal. Now I would turn to Dr. Rizwanul Islam, if you can make your points in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. First, thanks to the designated discussant, Dr. Khondokar Ghulam Wasim, for very helpful, very substantive comments. I would like to take this opportunity to thank also those who have raised issues and questions through the Q&A and chat boxes and so on. But I'm afraid it's not possible to address all the questions. I've tried
we will open up a little bit in a while.
Okay.
Rizwan bhai, you can just respond to Muazzem's comments.
Yeah. Now, if I limit my response to just Dr. Moasim's point, first, of course, as I said, I find them very helpful. Since the paper has not yet been written, they will definitely help sharpen some of my thoughts and so on and so forth. But only one observation. I hear that he thinks that I basically pointed out the role of the private sector in my presentation. My memory is not so good, I can't remember what I have said in the 14 minutes that was allocated to me, but I'm not sure I have used the term private sector even once. And I'm not sure I used the term even in the slides. But having said this, of course, when we talk about whether agriculture, industry, whatever industry that is, unless it is owned by the public sector, private sector has an important role. But having said this, doesn't mean that I was ignoring other factors completely, particularly when I was talking about issues like conditions at work, workers' rights, and so on and so forth. I was certainly referring to institutions and so on and so forth. So if I'm accused of focusing only on the private sector, that would imply, or that would really amount to erecting a strong man and shooting him. I hope that's not going to be the case. Apart from that, I really don't have anything else to say, because there has not been any points of disagreement where I need to come in and provide my responses. But again, thank you all. Thanks to the CPD and thanks to the chair. Thanks again to Professor Iman Sobhan and Professor Raunak Jahan for inviting me to this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rizanul Islam. Now, I would like to request Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, if you have anything to say in response to Dr. Sri Radha's comments in 2 minutes.
Well, no, thank you. I'll just take 1 minute maybe. No, I think the only point, or 2 points maybe, Radha's point on externalities. You see, civilizationally, Bengalis have always, or the people of Bangladesh, or people of Bengal have always opened doors to external people. We love foreigners. We love, you look historically, and I can go back to, and I was looking into one particular paper, go back to Faiyan, go back to Yijing, Zhuangzhang from China, the way he was, these are all Chinese travelers who came, centuries back. And look at, some of the relationship the giraffe went from here to China. Actually, people forget that. So Bengalis' love for foreigners are absolutely super. We have no problem with foreigners. The Turks ruled us for 300 years. The Mughals were there. We had no problem. You see, what happened was the British overstayed and looted our things and made the British Museum. That's the difference. The difference between the Turks and the Afghans and others, the only difference is that the British, took everything and made the British Museum. The second one, I always tell my students not to use the word balance. We are not balancing. Bangladesh is not balancing because, you can't balance, panda and elephant. Come on, the China, they're too big. We can't balance. You see, go back to Sheikh Mujib's speeches, and I was doing a content analysis of 22 speeches only that he presented in multilateral forums. Only 22 speeches. 151 times in that speech he said peace. 151 times. 76 times he said about the world, and 33 times he talked about Asia in that 22 speeches. Bangladesh, look at our relationship with Vietnam. We were one of the first to recognize provisional government of South Vietnam long before India recognized. So I don't want to use the word balancing. I think it's culture of peace that is very important. As you can see, he was against war, against arms race, against racism, against colonialism. That is the central to what Bengal and Bangladesh is all about. How far it will go, well, that remains an open question. But I guess without that foundation, I don't think Bangladesh will be able to go far. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, all the panelists. Now, I would like to request Obro, if you can summarize the questions. There are a number of questions to all the presenters. So you can just go one by one. Maybe you can start with Dr. Iftikhar's questions, which are posed to him.
Okay, madam, there are very few questions in the chat box, and there are 3 questions at the Q&A session, but Dr. Rizwanul Islam already answered the 3 of them. And so there are some questions for the Professor Imtiaz. Rezaul Kader, he asked, the Professor Imtiaz has presented a very nice paper. Thank you, sir. But over the 50 years of our journey, who is our real friend? Mohammad Mosleuddin requested Professor Imtiaz, thanks to all the excellent presentation. Is there any estimate of the honey volume in BD? I request Professor Imtiaz to elaborate. There is an announcement from the UPL, the publisher UPL. They are offering a discount for the participant and the panelist, a 35% discount. So they are announcing at the chat box. We are also repost it, so you can take the 35% discount from their website. And there are some questions for, let me check. My question is for Dr. Iqbal and the discussant. According to the Yale University data, Bangladesh is almost at the bottom of all countries in environmental performance. My question, what is the situation about deforestation in Bangladesh? And there is another question for Dr. Rizwan. Rezaul Kobir, he said that Dr. Rizwan probably missed the AI and the 4IR and did not mention the drudgery of the unskilled workers in home and abroad. The inclusion of this time may enrich the paper. So these are the questions from the chat box. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. So I'll go by the same chronology. So Dr. Iftikhar Iqbal, you first come in.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's forest deforestation issues is also a very important one. Bangladesh, I think its deforestation rate is more than 3%. Which is much above average than South Asian average of less than 1%. So deforestation is a huge problem, and particularly in Sundarbans, there has been huge deforestation, not only by small groups of people for their daily necessities and all this, but also by high policy level interventions through the coal-fired power plants and all this. So I think that need to be understood in the overall context of deforestation and their impact on the atmosphere and on the climate and rainfall also. And I'm not sure, because I haven't been to those remote areas where forestries are mostly in recent years. But I remember many years ago, I was in Mandarban and I saw there is a difference between some very lush green and some new plants coming up in the slopes of the hills. And I was told that actually those newly planted areas with some young trees, they're doing social forestry. And I was not sure what was going on. So after cutting the original forest, they were replacing that with some kind of plantation, and in between they are doing something else. I'm not sure who were doing that, but this social deforestation or social forestry has probably cost some forestry. And how that is going on, I don't know. But I think in terms of forestry, we need to really come up with some solution to stop forestry at a below sustainable level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Rizwan Bhai, would you like to come in?
Yes, maybe a minute or so about the question on artificial intelligence and fourth industrial revolution. I must assure everybody here that I'm not one of those who are in favor of going back to Chorka. But anyway, that was an issue. Those were issues which didn't quite feature in my presentation within the scope of the present paper and the presentation. But for those who are interested, I have expressed my thoughts on these issues in my published work, both in Bengali and in English. So if there is an interest, I can provide the references. Now that I've got another opportunity, maybe I should make a small acknowledgement that whatever I said in my presentation and presented in the slides, a good part of it draws on the forthcoming book that I am a co-author of in Bangla, of course, Bangladesher Orthonaitik Unnayoner Goti Dhara Suborno Jayantiতে ফিরে দেখা UPL পাবলিশ করছে আশা করছি মাসখানেকের মধ্যে বেরিয়ে যাবে তবে এই বছর থাকতে বেরোবে কিনা বলতে পারছি না তবে acknowledgement যে অনেকখানি ওই বইয়ের কাজ থেকে নেওয়া Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rizwanul Islam. Now over to Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. There are a couple of questions, quite provoking ones also, provocating ones.
Thank you. Thank you. No, well, Mr. Kader, whether Bangladesh, whether we have friends or not, it reminded me of Aristotle's statement, which actually Montagu made it famous. And the statement is, oh, my friends, there is no friend, quote unquote. That was what Aristotle said as Montagu quoted Aristotle. Somehow not getting invited into this summit that Biden has called, I think is a blessing for Bangladesh, let me tell you. Otherwise, Bangladesh would have been a serious problem whether to go or not, in that way. Now that Pakistan has said no, but look, Pakistan got invited, Philippines got invited. If they are democracies, I don't have to say anything, And after Donald Trump and after Capitol Hill getting attacked and people sitting on the speaker's chair, if you call that democracy, God bless you. Let's be honest. In fact, if it had been in any other country, people would have said it's a failed state. Come on, why are we reproducing something which is not there? And I don't want to go into details of the Black Lives Matter and other problems, the Voter Suppression Act, but we can have a different session on the US democracy. But not getting invited, I think it has been a blessing. And let's see how it goes. Second, on the honey, there's a question on honey. Well, it's mainly the Human Development Index first. We focus more on GDP, but human development. This is Amartya Sen did it long back. Professor Rahman Soman cited long back some of his papers. Well, people were even thinking, why are they writing something on that? Are they making the figures and all? But, they have pointed out about the Human Development Index long before what Bangladesh is today, how things were getting better. I remember Professor Rahman Soban's paper, if I'm not wrong, in Guwahati, in Northeast India. If you read that paper, and you will see that he was pointing that why would Bangladeshis cross to that side? We are doing much better. Why would you go to an underdeveloped place from a developed place? So the honey is the Human Development Index, and I think we had an extraordinary GEO-NGO partnership. I don't think you will be able to replicate that partnership. Our GEO and NGO grew together from 71 onwards. and of course, and then you have the GDP that people talk about. So honey is that. Now, how much you can build on that, that is an open question. But I believe what we need is a Bangladesh dream. That is what we economics, unfortunately, and bulk, I see in the platform, bulk of them all are economists. The problem with economics is they focus on scarcity. And scarcity is a psychological problem. It creates fear. Any reading of Freud or Jung will tell you it's something that you should not, because fear creates intolerance, and then intolerance creates hatred, and goes on and on. But unfortunately, economics, they look into scarcity and not on abundance. And I think it's time to look into abundance and not scarcity. Final question on the decolonizing, and I think we have someone, Katie Tanha, pointing out that, look, decolonize the British Museum, I think, and pointing out, yes. Now, just quickly, I'll take 1 minute. When Kohinoor, there was one demand from, I think it started from India, that Kohinoor has, you have to return the Kohinoor back to us. Then Pakistan said, no, it went from Lahore, so it has to be Pakistan. Then somebody from Sri Lanka said, no, it's originally from Sri Lanka, it should be. And then somebody from Bangladesh said, no, it actually from Bangladesh, Nawab, it went, all those things. And so the British were very happy and said, we can't cut the Kohinoor, so we'll keep it in Britain. And then I wrote a paper, I said, look, no, we can solve the problem. Let us create a South Asian museum. Let us create a South Asian roving museum. And every 1 year it will be in Delhi, 1 year in Lahore, 1 year, 1 year, and hundreds and thousands and millions of people who turn up to see the looted things that we have in the. So we're out the South Asian Museum. So I think we need to think out of the box to resolve some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. I would like to once again thank all the panelists. So, Obro, how much time we have before we close the session? Whether I have time to make a few comments?
Only 5 minutes.
Only 5 minutes. Okay. I'll just make a few comments. In fact, after this, such an exciting and such a rich discussion, there's not much to add, but I would like to just touch upon a few issues, because this is a very important session also, in the sense that what we have been discussing at this session, it is clear that many of the achievements and successes, if we are not looking at the capital base, which includes human capital, man-made capital, and also natural capital, the sustainability of the growth is not going to be there. We are not going to achieve the sustainability of economic growth what we have made so far. So while we bask in the glory of becoming a large economy, which is about now over $400 billion, and we are also going to set to graduate from the least developed country to a developing country, and also make a transition from a middle income country to an upper middle income country. We are also posed with these significant challenges. So that's why the sustainability issue is coming again and again. When by sustainability, what do you mean? In fact, back in 1987, the Brundtland Commission, which is also known as the World Commission on Environment and Development, that commission eloquently defined the sustainability, which is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. In fact, this is also applicable, relevant for today. And while talking about sustainability, we have heard from two speakers, particularly on the natural capital and also human capital. In case of natural capital, the framing of Dr. Iqbal's paper, he rightly framed that if we exhaust the stock of natural capital, that's going to give us a growth which is not going to be sustainable, or which is not going to be there at all for the future generation. And while doing so, he brings out the issue of water as an example. But this is also applicable to other natural resources, be it forestry. Someone pointed out the issue of deforestation, which is very high. In Bangladesh, it is 3.3% deforestation rate, which is much higher in South Asia. The average South Asian rate is 0.6%. So deforestation, water pollution, he has mentioned, and also exhaustion of other, or depletion of other resources, fisheries resources, even natural gas. So these are the resources which are depreciated, and some of these are exhaustible resources. That means that we wouldn't be able to recover once those are lost or exhausted. And in fact, the cost is very high. I myself, while doing my PhD, my whole thesis was about the estimation of economic cost of natural resource degradation. And I estimated that it is 4.1% of GDP, so which is very high, that our natural resources, deforestation, fisheries exploitation, then air pollution, then natural gas exploitation, all these. So, and now it is more, because we are seeing that every other day how the nature is being depleted. So, and with that type of growth, is this growth sustainable? Is this growth is inclusive? That's also there, because of course in Bangladesh, this whole model of development, people, it is a large country, so poor people also depend a lot on the nature, exploiting this natural resources, but they do this for their own survival. But more importantly and more seriously is that natural resources are also exploited by the rich and the powerful, and they do it for their for accumulation of their wealth. So this also is another sign of the unequal development process which is happening, and which is also degrading the quality of growth itself. So now when we are looking forward for future growth model for the next 50 years or so, this is the time when we should take into account these issues, that how do we protect our natural capital, and also how do we improve our human capital. The presentation by Dr. Rizwanul Islam also showed that, of course, productivity is increasing, but on the other hand, it is not compatible with the wages also. So on the one hand, how the productivity can be improved, and on the other hand, how the wages and how a decent living can be ensured. That's another aspect of our future growth. And in that, the issue of technology has come, but again, how this technology will be used and who will have access to technology, those are also very important issues, because technology can be also another instrument for inequality. So now, if we I'll finish in 1 minute. So if we really want to move forward, what is really needed? Of course, the policy issues, those have been touched upon slightly by the speakers, but I see that there are 3 types of policy failures for these degradation of capital. Natural capital particularly. These are related to policy failures, institutional failures, and also market failures. I will elaborate this with an example. For example, this issue of tannery. So, it was within the city itself, and there wasn't any, because the government could not move them away. There wasn't any policy. And when the policies were taken, when the decision was taken, government decision, but still the government could not, move them away out of the city, because this is the power balance is somewhere, the powerful ones can have this influence on the policymakers themselves, or take the issue of deforestation, forest encroachment of forest or deforestation. The forest department has neither the efficiency nor the power or capacity to stop encroachment. So that's another institutional aspect, that institutional failure. The third issue is with market failure, that is related to the pricing of resources. If we are subsidizing or incentivizing resources which are scarce, for example, natural gas, or the other types of resources. For natural gas is a classical example, or fisheries. So if we give subsidies, there is always a tendency to overconsume, and it has been estimated, or it has been argued by many studies, that subsidies lead to overconsumption and waste of resources. So market accurate pricing or pricing of resources is very, very important. Unless and until we can take care of all these factors, we will not be able to do justice to the resources, be it natural resources or human resources. And finally, now that we have discussed about many achievements of Bangladesh, it is now time, and we hope, and I also believe, that Bangladesh will continue to grow at a faster rate. But will that growth be inclusive, and will that growth be sustainable? I think this is the time now to think and to have a transition from a quantity-based growth to a quality-based growth, to change our mindset from a quantitative approach to a qualitative approach. So with these words, I once again thank all the speakers, the paper presenters, the discussants, the participants, and also who made very interesting questions. Thank you all. Thank you very much. We have another session in a couple of minutes. I hope you will join that. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida.
Okay.